Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Abbey, Adult Services Librarian for the City of Forest Grove. Welcome to the first in a series of online book discussion sessions I'm hosting this summer with Jane Kirkpatrick. Our topic today and in the next session will be Jane's 2016 novel, This Road We Traveled. And then in August, we'll shift gears and focus on her 2019 book, One More River to Cross. We have extra print copies of both of those titles available for you to check out and pick up curbside, and I provided links to both of those in the description section below. On Tuesday, September 15th, starting at 6:30, we're hosting a special live stream event with Jane to coincide with the publication of her newest novel, Something Worth Doing, which chronicles the life of Oregon writer, newspaper editor, and women's rights advocate Abigail Scott Dunaway. You can watch that live stream event on our Facebook page, and there's a link to that in the description section below, or you can watch it here on our YouTube channel. And if you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, click that red button right below the screen. That way you'll stay up to date on all of the really great content we're posting here throughout the summer. Now, since this live stream event coincides with the publication of Jane's newest novel, we're really pleased to announce that we're giving away 5 signed copies of that book. So if you want to enter your name in the drawing, click the link below, fill out the form, and you're good to go. So I'm going to bring Jane in. She's joining us from her home in Central Oregon, Rattlesnake and Rock Ranch, and we'll begin this discussion of her 2016 book, This Road We Traveled. I hope you enjoy these book discussion sessions and that you can join us throughout this summer for more insightful comments on these 2 wonderful books by Jane Kirkpatrick. Enjoy. So the story of Tabby Brown or Tabitha Brown really is a very remarkable one because there is this sense in the story that she is too old to be doing this, and there is this suggestion that her son Oris, and I would love to talk about him, put up some roadblocks and discouraged her from making the trip, and yet she decided to do it anyway, even disregarding his requests. Talk a little bit about the relationship that she had with her children. So she had 2 sons and a daughter.
Right.
And each of those offspring, I think, has a very interesting kind of dynamic with her. Maybe we can start with Oris.
Well, one of the things that I noticed as I started doing research is that she never lived with any of her adult children until the very end when she was getting ready to die. She lived with Fern at that point in Salem, Oregon. But it was common for many generations to live in the same household during that time period, during the 1800s. So that was one kind of, I wonder why she never lived with them. She always lived independently. Both of her sons, they were born in the Connecticut country, in the Eastern country, and their father was a pastor and she was a teacher. And when her husband, David, died, she raised the children by teaching. And they had convinced her, Oris and Manthano had convinced her to let them buy a boat. And they were going to, transport and become ship people, along with her brother-in-law, who had been a ship captain. And there was a terrible wreck and they almost died. And she had decided at that point that she was not staying anywhere near that coast. And so that's when they moved to St. Charles, Missouri, and just sort of picked up everything and moved. And so I think her relationship with Oris, it was like she indulged against her better judgment and letting them get this boat. But it was like she wasn't going to let that happen again. And he had a very large farm. He had a large family, but he got the Oregon bug and headed west 2 years before they made this major shift. So for 2 years, she didn't know whether he was dead or alive. And I'm sure there were probably words at that point because his wife took over the farm, and then and his sons, while they waited for him to come back, if he came back.
Mhm.
And then when he did come back, he was convinced that Oregon was God's country and that they all should go, but not her. And I think he said that out of protection,
Mhm.
because he was concerned that she was lame, and the wagons were horribly uncomfortable. There were no springs. It was a killer on a person's back to ride all the way, and so most people didn't. They walked, and walked beside the carts and walked beside the wagons. So, I think at the same time that she probably admired his gumption, it fit with her own. She was probably There were probably some tensions throughout their lifetime that he just did what he was going to do,
Mhm.
and that's what she did too. She did what she was going to do, and
Mhm.
so they didn't always see eye to eye. But I think there was a great deal of respect between them, and certainly in the later years after they made it to Oregon, a great deal of care that he had for her. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. He comes across as not only being a really good storyteller, but also as someone who's very persuasive,
Yes.
or maybe thinks he's very persuasive, and also fairly domineering. He sounds like he was a rather large man,
Yes,
or at
I
least
think
a
he was.
physically dominating
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
Uh,
He convinced everybody when they finally all went together, and then of course Manthano at the last minute changed his mind and didn't go.
mhm.
But the group that they were all together with, he basically left them behind. I mean, Oris just kept pushing forward. This is how we're going to do it, and so they lost touch with him, and that is what opened the door for someone to say, "I have a shortcut."
Mhm.
And so there was probably a little bit of that competition in there too, of, well, if we could beat him there, that would be really cool, as
Mm,
opposed to having him lecture us that we're so far behind. um,
right.
so yes, I think domineering and persuasive would be good terms to use for him.
Right. And even when they're reunited, there's this sense of kind of, I, I told you so. I mean, there was
Yeah.
almost this kind of like, well, I'm glad to see you, but by the way,
Right.
if you'd followed my
Exactly.
instructions, none of this would have
This would have
happened.
happened. And yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Just what
Um,
everybody needs when they're starving to death and
right, right.
grieving. Yeah,
They've
yeah,
gone through this huge ordeal, and then somebody
yeah,
comes and lectures them about what they did wrong.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
always really
yeah,
helpful.
yeah, yeah.
And Manthano seems, I mean, because he didn't head west, he's a sort of a shadowy character, and it seems like the tension in that relationship is with his wife. Can you talk a little bit about her, Catherine?
There,
Right?
yes, there was that kind of tension. Also, he was a slaveholder, and there is a separate book actually that a descendant wrote about the family, and there's a very large section of it about Manthano
Hmm.
and how he didn't go, and how the war affected him, and that he lost everything, and literally fought for his life. Missouri was that, you know, um, it was the border state, and so it was very bloody. There were terrible assaults there and lynchings and all kinds of things. And Manthano was quite a wealthy landowner, in part because he had slaves. And I think that was one reason why he didn't go west, because he couldn't imagine him being able to start over.
Hmm.
Oris was willing to start over, but
Hmm.
Manthano wasn't. And I think his wife, apparently, I mean, we have letters. That's what sort of described that relationship for me in the story. Um, that he that Tabby suggested that she had taken him away, and that they never got to see him. They never got to hear about the grandkids that were born, all of this sort of thing. And it was because Tabby said, "Well, it's because of your wife."
Hmm.
And he had written back defending her. And so I think there was that was the tension in that relationship, was over the daughter-in-law and grandchildren. And again, one wonders about Tabby's own domineering personality in
Hmm.
light of her interactions with her children.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So these two male characters who seem to represent sort of opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of their relationship to each other, their relationship to Tabby. And then you have Fern. And I have to
Yes.
say, I think Fern and Virgil were just such a really fascinating couple. And it struck me about halfway through that in many ways they seem very modern.
I actually think they were the most progressive thinkers of the clan, that they found some ways to keep going. And if you walk through Salem, Oregon today, you can see evidence of their life with Pringle Court and Pringle Creek and the things that they contributed to the development of that community. And at the same time, because they were a part of the Applegate Cutoff and the great period of starvation and strain, that I think the two of them, I believe they demonstrated with each other just how you help support each other in a time of great trial. We know that struggles like that can split people and separate us, and other times they force us to be closer. And I think they were that example, that they were brought closer to each other and were very. Virgil was willing to give up whatever it took in order to get his children and Tabitha too to safety. So I like them a lot, and I like just, in some ways they represented for a lot of people in the Oregon Trail stories the reluctance, particularly of the women, to go. But the reality is, if they didn't go, they might never see their spouses again. But they were, she had a fairly comfortable life. I mean, they had a large home, they had a well-working farm, they had a family, they had children that they, had their own life. And to give that all up and start over, for the men in their lives, that was sort of adventurous. We're going to start over and do this wonderful thing. Right. But for them, it was, I think for the women, it was another load of work.
Yeah, and both Fern and Virgil were nurturing a loss with their son.
Exactly.
And it seems that in many ways this trip was a way for both of them to come to terms with that sense of grief, and that while he was certainly very supportive of her before they left, that's a difficult thing to carry with you. And as right. you make clear in the story, one of the things about this trip is that there's just a lot of time where you're spent in your own head, and it's a long trip, and it's difficult, and it's monotonous. And Fern certainly had plenty of opportunity to replay and reflect on that loss, right. Day after day. You're and when she wasn't documenting it through drawing, she was in her head. And it seems to me that this trip was a way for them to not only process that grief individually, but also as a couple.
I think you're right. That was part of what I hoped might come through with that. When you write about real people, where you have some of the history, and I had a chance to talk to descendants and listen to their stories, I have to let go of the idea that I'm actually putting words in the mouths of real people. I'm creating characters, and I'm hoping that I'm authentic to who they might have been. And so, we don't really know whether they processed their grief the way they did. But given, I sort of think about, it's kind of like CSI, you get bits and pieces of a person's life and their story, and try to put it into some perspective. And so I think I was authentic to who they were and how they moved forward in their lives.